got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dano. You guys, I got a really cool guest tonight. I have a fellow Air Force security police officer. His name's Dick. He was so kind to make time to come on the show. And you guys, he's had some pretty cool encounters. I'm going to tell you that right now. If you guys have heard me in the past, I always look to try to get someone who did what I did in the Air Force or any military for that matter to come on and tell about some encounters. And Dick Ant stepped up and answered the call. So before we bring him on, I'm just going to say thank you for all the support, you guys. I truly appreciate it. If you guys have had an encounter and you'd like to come on the show, please send me an email at thecryptidpodcast72@gmail.com. Again, thecryptidpodcast72@gmail.com. And you know what? Without any further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Dick.
Evening,
Dick,
Daniel.
welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Well, so you are going to talk about what Air Force Base?
Edwards Air Force Base, which is about 80 miles north of Los Angeles in the Mojave Desert.
Oh, you guys. I've heard about some stuff that's coming out of Edwards Air Force Base. So I can't wait to get you on, get into these stories. So you know what? Let's just get into it.
I had got to Edwards in December of 1985. And when I got there, as I processed in and was assigned to Sea Flight, which I worked swings and mids, 3 days from 2 o'clock till 10, and then 24 hours off. And the last 3 days were from 10 till 6 in the morning. And we worked base patrols. Edwards has North Base, Main Base, South Base, the Rocket Lab, and a bombing range. It's a very large installation. So typically each flight had about, I would say 15 people. I was a sergeant when I was there, and I did base patrol, ran radar. I enjoyed working the Rocket Lab because I like the remoteness. It typically took about 25 to 30 minutes to get there. And the Rocket Lab was 28 square miles. And what they did was anything that had to do with rockets, whether it was engines, whether it was liquid or solid fuels, they did various different researches on everything. We had 2 missile silos there that were used to launch the first Minuteman missiles. And they actually used cables on those missiles to make sure they only went up so high and then they brought them right back down. When you look at the Rocket Lab from Edwards, you see the Lehman Ridge, you see the western part of it, and along that ridge are different rocket stands where they would test engines. They had rocket gantries where they could put the whole rocket on. They tested the space shuttle booster engines there after the engines had exploded. When they finally got around to testing the new ones, they were tested there. So there's a lot of history there. And I enjoyed going up there because I was my own boss. Was myself and a gate guard, and there were 8 Air Force firefighters. And normally, after about 5 o'clock, we would be the only people there till about 8 o'clock the next day, unless there was some type of test that was going on where you would have people there that would monitor what was going on, and that occurred at times. The night in question here was toward the end of my tour, about 3 months before I left for Thule, Greenland. It was in the fall of '87. From the time I got to Edwards till then, I had heard lots of stories of what people called blue eyes, which was, for better terms, a Bigfoot type creature that roamed the South Base area and Rocket Lab area. There were reports how it chased people around. There was a report in the early or mid 70s of how one had scared people at a Mars communication site in the South Base of Edwards. And Mars is an acronym for a military site where people in Vietnam could call to, and then those calls would be transferred to their dependents in the States, either by phone or by radio. And that occurred in the mid-70s. There were reports from the early to late 70s of Bigfoot sightings in the town of Lancaster, which is about 15 miles south, and Palmdale, as well as to the west of Edwards in the Tehachapies. I didn't really give any stock to any of these stories because I got used to working nights, and I enjoyed working nights. And there were times I would go out and walk around a lot at night. And I never really put stock in those stories. I didn't. So fast forward now to 87. We're working the midnight shift. I had went to relieve my gate guard around 3:30 in the morning. We had a full moon. And he had only been there about 6 months. I gave him my map. I told him just to take a long drive around the base, roll the window down, enjoy the evening, stay out of the areas that I had highlighted yellow on the map, and just enjoy the evening. Come back in about a half hour. He drove to the north, and about 3/4 to a mile away is a set of railroad tracks. They use freight from rails to bring up different things to the rocket lab. But at that night, there were no trains active, nothing. He had stopped at this railroad track, which I thought was odd. It was a beautiful night, so I had taken a chair and propped it up against Kate's shack, and I was just sitting outside enjoying the evening. It's neat to see the Milky Way at Edwards too, which was something to see. I'd never seen it before. So I'm watching him, and he's sitting at this railroad crossing for about, it seemed like 10 minutes. All of a sudden, the vehicle turns around and comes back to the gate at a high rate of speed. He parks and comes running in, and I'm inside, and he's going on about how it was staring at him. And I said, what? And he's pale. He's scared. So I told him, I said, before you talk, I said, why don't you sit down and I'll sit down. And once you get your breath and you calm down, let's talk. So we waited about 5 or 10 minutes. And he said, I got to the railroad tracks and I seen this thing in the road staring down at me. And I explained to him, I said, well, we do have a large amount of wild donkeys or burros here at the lab. I said, and they happen to be in the most unexpected places at times. I said, they go across the road, they go wherever they want. And at that time, he said, no. He said it was on 2 legs. And I looked at him and I said, it's just me and the firefighters and you. I said, and the firefighters aren't going to come out of the firehouse unless there's an alarm activation, especially at 3:30 in the morning. And I assured him, I said, the base patrols are not authorized to come up here to the rocket lab. They don't. I said, the only person that's going to come up here if they want is the flight chief, and he seldom comes up here. So he was becoming real insistent about calling our flight chief to tell him what was going on. I said, well, let's do this before you call anybody. Let me go down there and see what's going on first, and I'll come back. I said, I want you to stay off the phone. Don't call the desk sergeant. Don't call the flight chief, and do not call the other gate guards and tell them that you've seen something staring down at you. And I said, promise me you're going to do that. He said, all right. I said, I'll be back. So I drove a little short of the railroad tracks and I shut off my engine to the truck, shut off the light, and I waited 20 minutes for my eyes to adjust to the darkness, even with the full moon. I got out of the vehicle and I started walking the railroad tracks going west toward the lake bed. About 10 minutes into my walk, my hair stood up, which I thought was odd because I've never had that happen before. And I knew that there was no test that went on up at the rocket lab where you would have static that would cause your hair to stand up, because everything is grounded up there because of the potential for things blowing up. And sometimes that happens up there. It can be a very unforgiving place to work. So as I'm standing there with my hair standing up, I'm starting to get scared too. I'm looking around, and still full moon night. So what I did was I dropped to one knee and I started slowing my breathing down to calm myself down. In front of me is the Lehman Ridge. I'm on the east side of it. The west side faces the base. The east side is what I'm on. So what I did was I started to scan the ridge from the south, going all the way to the north. And as I'm moving across the top of it, I noticed this figure that's standing up there. Now what gets me is security policemen go through air-based ground defense training with the Army for a month and a half at different times during their career, whether it's an airman, an NCO, or a senior NCO. And one of the things that's always stressed is how you never stand up on high ground at night, especially with a full moon, because it gives your position away. You're illuminated. You stand out. And this thing stood up there like it owned the place. It swayed to the left and the right on its feet, never made a sound. The more I looked at it, I noticed that the arms were extremely long. There was no neck. If anything, I was about 8 to 1,000 feet away from it, looking up. And I didn't notice if its eyes were blue. The more I looked at it, the more scared I got. Now, I'm also armed with 38. I have 18 rounds. And my hand was like this, shaking. As I told Daniel, one of the things that you learn as a police officer in the Air Force and a civilian, you have to learn to control your breathing and the way you hold your weapon. That's how you place your rounds. And my hand is shaking big time. So what I did was I just started walking backwards along the railroad tracks, just keeping an eye on this thing. And I got back to my vehicle, went back to the gate shack, and the gate guard started going off on me saying, "Who's white now?" And I said, "Well, obviously I am." He said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Well, our relief is going to get here at 6:30. It's now a little after 4. I'm going to sit here and think." He goes, "Well, you seen it?" I said, "I've seen something. I need to think." So relief got there, and I didn't tell him anything. I didn't. And on the way back to Edwards, I had told him, I said, today's the end of my 6 days. I'm off today and for the next 3 days. I said, what I'm going to do is just turn my weapon in like any other day. I'm going to go back to the dorm and I'm going to go to bed. He goes, well, I may go tell our squadron commander what went on. I said, if you do that, and if they send somebody over and wake me up and have me go to his office, and he asked me what I seen, I said, I'm going to tell him I didn't see a thing. He said, why are you going to do that? I said, the more I think about this, the more I realize I've seen something I can't quite explain. I said, it was no person. I said, and I don't know how my squadron commander will take that if I tell him that. So I didn't. There was also another reason I kept quiet. In our career field, we tend to get along like a family. And like a family, you pull jokes on one another. I kept praying over and over that someone was going to do what we always do to somebody, come up to them a couple days later or a week and say, well, we really scared the shit out of you, didn't we? That never happened. Nobody ever came forward. I told Daniel that several years ago, our flight from Edwards had started a Facebook group. And a couple of the guys had asked me why I had got so quiet before I had orders to Thule, Greenland. I volunteered to go to Thule. I needed to get a remote and I wanted to go. And they laughed because they said, well, it was because there were so many women behind so many trees. And I said, yeah, that's right. I said, there's no trees at Thule, and there's only about 30 women. Not a lot of women. They said, why did you get so quiet? And I told them what had happened, what I'd seen. A few of them laughed at me. My partner didn't. He goes, myself and Dunsford have a really good in-depth knowledge of the rocket lab, and if he's saying this, I believe him. I got contacted by another guy that worked with us. He got dispatched to South Base just over a year after I had been gone. He got dispatched because there was a report of flares being dropped around 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'd asked him, I said, if there was flares being dropped, I said, did anybody contact base ops to see if there was any type of test going on where aircraft were dropping flares to do tests? He said, you think now we tend to think about that. He goes, but at the time, nobody did. He goes, they just told me to go. He goes, I was out there for a good 45 minutes driving around all over the place. He goes, as I'm driving out there, he goes, this thing stepped out on the road and looked down on me. He goes, as quickly as it was there, it was gone. And I said, does it match the description I gave you? About 8 to 9 feet tall, maybe 700-800 pounds, no neck, long arms? He goes, yep. I worked here in Licking County at the Licking County Domestic Relations Court, and next door to our courthouse is the Child Support Building. Their paralegal was in the Air Force, and he came up to me one day. He goes, your boots are really looking bad. I said, I know. I said, I haven't polished them in a while. And he asked me, he goes, I heard you were at Edwards. I said, yeah, I was. He said, did you see anything unique at night working out there? He goes, I take it you work nights. I said, I did. He goes, what did you see at night? I said, burrows, lots of burrows, owls. He said, what about on 2 legs? And I got real quiet and I looked at him and I cussed him out. And he laughed. He told me that his buddy, who's also in pararescue, they're the people that go in and rescue pilots that are shot down. They have extensive medical training and they're trained to defend themselves and the people they take care of. A lot of training, a lot of money goes into them. Very professional troops. His buddy took the Edwards Desert Survival course at South Base. It's a 3-day, 2-night course. He said his second night he was asleep in the desert and his friend said he just stood up and all the hair on him was standing up. He looked around and about 25 feet away, for better terms, there was a Bigfoot looking at him. He goes, my buddy was with me and we've done several things up until then. He goes, and we weren't afraid of nothing. He goes, he told me this thing just about scared the shit out of him. He goes, never made a move on him, just watched him. He said, and eventually just walked off. So, for years, I ran that story through my head about what I've seen that night. I got no reason to make it up. I seen what I did. And that's about all I can tell you. And it's the first time that I can experience that I was zapped. And that's what I had found out caused my hair to get up. Bigfoot uses infrasound and they use it to either stun prey or move it. Not only had I got zapped that night before I seen it, but I got zapped 2 other nights at the gate shack when I released the gate guard after that happened. Both times it scared the shit out of me. After that night, what I seen, I never went out and walked at night at the rocket lab. I always stayed with my vehicle. So, Daniel, do you have any questions?
Oh boy, do I got questions. Okay, are we ready? Because, yeah, see, I have questions.
Okay.
All right. So, um, what was the general environment like around the base, especially where you were working mostly? Was it remote from the main base, like away from the main base? And was it? Well, I know in the interior it wasn't heavily patrolled, but on the exterior around that area was it heavily patrolled?
The rocket lab only had one patrolman and a gate guard. There were no fences around the rocket lab at that time. There since has been a fence that's been erected. And on the east side of the rocket lab, you have an active bombing range. In fact, the rocket lab was a bombing range for many years, and there's unexploded ordnance scattered around it. Um, the patrolman there would keep busy because we had people that would come up and steal things at times. So we had building checks that we conducted. A lot of those buildings were alarmed, so we kept track of that. We also worked with the fire department on any type of fire alarms or chemical spills that may or may not occur. Um, if you look at Edwards on Google Earth, you'll see the rocket lab to the east, the northeast. You'll notice a ridge that is east of the lake bed across from North Base. And that's where the rocket lab is. There is a fence around it now. I can tell you this, that the nearest town is Roseman, and it is on the west side of the base. So it was a small town then, now it's rather large. Between Roseman and the Roseman Lake Bed, which is part of Edwards, is a large area with ponds called the Paiute Ponds. The ponds are so large that they have lotteries for duck hunters to come in to hunt ducks there. There's fish. You also have a pond in the South Base area. There's a park there, large park there. I did see on Google that there was a Bigfoot sighting at that park in the lake eating fish. There were several duck hunting clubs on Edwards at one time, but not anymore. Are there base patrols that patrol the perimeter of the base? I would say now there is, yeah. Back then, we had a wildlife unit, and it did its best to make perimeter patrols and respond to bobcats and snakes that came on base.
Okay. So you kind of answered the question for me. My question was, were there any base legends or strange stories floating around before you had your encounter? And you had answered yes, there was. Um, when you had your sighting, which I would assume would be blue eyes that you saw.
I assume it is.
Yeah. Um, did you notice any sounds that it might have made, or did the troop that was saw it before you?
Neither of us heard anything. Both of us had our hair stand up. And after getting with an Indian in Vancouver Island, he explained that to me, that's called being zapped with infrasound. So we both got zapped.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what occurred at the Mars facility, they had a female airman who had been zapped as well. So, I mean, that wasn't part of the legends that I'd heard. I heard that it chased people, it threw things at people, and that was the extent of it. Now, if you go further east of Edwards, you run into 29 pounds, and I guess the Marines have stories of it. So,
Okay. So let's kind of go back to you drive, you get out of your vehicle, you see it. What was your immediate reaction when that happened, when you saw it?
well, I could see very well from where I was. And you got to remember, I'm about 1,000 feet away, and I'm looking up. But with the full moon, it made it stand out. And what I noticed was the length of the arms. The arms were just going down. almost toward his knees, which I thought that's no person. It just is no person. That area where it was a fenced off area, and there's no way you can get in. There's a gate, and in some of the areas at the rocket lab where they're doing tests, you'll have a light outside that can tell you when you can go in. If it's red, you can't. If it's green, you can't. This area was always red, and the gate's always closed. So there was no way I could go in there to verify tracks, which annoyed me because it was fenced off, and I'm not going to go into an area with a red light. I'm not.
Right.
So it made no noise, no motions, just stood there like you're in my neighborhood now.
Yep.
And it had no qualms letting me see it. It didn't run, just stood there.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that the higher ups at the base knew about this creature out in that area?
You know, I've asked myself that for a long time. If I look at some of the Bigfoot reports on Google, there's one that talks about how they had security policemen that were posted to watch it with night observation devices, and they would report to an officer. I'd never heard any of those stories when I got to Edwards. But what I found interesting was there was a story of an airman who was driving from Mojave going to the North Gate at Edwards, another full moon night, and as he's driving along 58, he can see this thing that's keeping pace with his car running alongside the berm between the highway and the railroad tracks. And he's driving about 50, 55, 60 miles an hour. And this thing's just running with him. He finally pulls off the ramp and goes to the North Gate that goes into Edwards. And there's an SP there. And he doesn't tell the SP what it was, but the SP tells him that there's strange things out there at night. It's a midnight shift. And the guy looks, and the SP had a night observation device at the gate. And I was kind of curious because I'd never seen these my 2.5 years at Edwards. And my buddy worked the armory. I said, did we have any nods in the armory? He goes, yeah. He goes, we had 4 old Vietnam nods that you could attach to the handle on an M16. He goes, nobody ever took them out. So, and that's one of the ones from Google that I found credible.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, let me ask you this. So, do you think that the creature, from what you observed or from what the other airmen observed, do you believe in any way that it seemed to be more intelligent than what people think is a dumb animal, or like an unnatural intelligence?
if it could survive out there in the desert, and I'll use this for an example. When they built the fence around the rocket lab, the Corps of Engineers did an impact study stating what the animals were around that area. And they listed mountain lions. And for a mountain lion to be out there in the Edwards area, there has to be enough food for it to survive and water. As I said, the South Park has a huge pond. And if you go further to the west, you get the Paiute ponds, which are even larger. So there's water. There's burrows, there's badgers, fox, coyote, variety of birds, snakes. So you've got food there. For something to be able to survive there, there's got to be some type of intelligence. I really believe that. I mean, for us, we take it for granted that before we go to work, we go to the chow hall. If we want to have lunch, while we're working, we can get relieved and go have dinner, even if it's short. Or if we want, on days off, we can drive in town and we can get a pizza or something like that. So with us, we just take for granted that we're going to eat. We got a place to stay. We've got shelter. We got food. We got water. But this thing would have to manage that. Now there's crops that grow out there too. When you go farther to the south, there's alfalfa. They used to have orchards out there for a long time. They don't anymore, but if you go up into the quartz hills, they grow pecans. So there's food sources out there. You just have to be able to find them.
Mm-hmm.
If you go west, you have the Tehachapis, and they found tracks of Bigfoots in the Tehachapi along with bear. So you've got cattle up there. We had legal immigrants that would sometimes run sheep on the bombing range. Well, the food is there. You just have to figure out how you're going to get it. And if this thing can survive as long as it has, there has to be an intelligence there. They're not dumb.
Yeah.
I don't believe they're dumb. I don't. Especially if they can live in a desert-like environment. And I'd asked several people, it's like, why do you think they're there? And people come up with the theories that maybe they migrated from the Tehachapis to the San Bernardinos, and they went the quickest way, which was across the desert. And that could be a reason. There's other people that say there's Bigfoot on military bases because they find that they're not harassed that much because people can't go on base and look for them.
Yeah.
That could be another reason. I just know what I seen that night, and I often wish I had facts to back up what I could say.
Yeah.
All I can do is tell you what I seen, what I experienced.
It's funny that you say, you wish you had things to back up your experience, and there's a lot of people who just don't understand military life, and especially the jobs that you and I had. Oh, well, why didn't you have a camera with you? If what would happen if we got caught with a camera on our persons?
We'd get in trouble.
That's an understatement.
I can't tell you how many people I knew would take pictures from the flight line, then they'd go to BX and get it processed. And it's like, how can you do that?
Yeah.
And it's like, I never thought of carrying a camera. I carried the paperwork I needed. I also carried a radio and a cassette player, so I had music to listen to because I love music.
Yeah.
I carried a pair of binoculars. I was fortunate that I had found a 7.5 minute topo map of the rocket lab at one of the business companies in Lancaster that sold business equipment. They had a 7.5 topo map. And that map I had kept for years because it was so detailed. And it was far more detailed than anything I had. So those were the basic things I carried besides my radio, my 38 with my ammo.
Yeah.
And,
just your standard gear, your duty gear.
and
Yeah.
that would be about it. Plus, I typically work with the airmen that were with me. We'd do some kind of tabletop exercise while we were there to say, what if this happens? What are we going to do? How are we going to respond?
So after this experience, after this encounter, did you feel that at any time, did you have any strange dreams or any severe mood swings or anything like that?
Related to this?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, I can't say that. I've gone through a divorce, so things were a little challenging at times.
Yeah.
And that was about the only type of stress I'd had was related to that. But because of this, I just told myself I wasn't going to go out and walk around at night. I wasn't. I still would sit up on the ridge and watch the sunset at night. That was something I enjoyed doing. Being up there was the best place in the house to watch sunsets at Edwards. I love that.
Let's see here. So how did this shape your beliefs in cryptids or Bigfoots after this experience?
Well, I can't say that I ever believed in Bigfoot. I'm from Missouri, and I can remember hearing about the Missouri Monster in Louisiana, Missouri growing up. I was a teenager then. I never really gave it much thought. And when this happened, it was like, well, I've seen something. I know it wasn't anybody I worked with planning playing a joke on me. So I became more open-minded about it. My oldest daughter would always ask me about aliens being at Edwards, and I told her that I had no knowledge about that. And I meant it. I said, I'm not going to tell you a story and just pull you around saying that, oh, they're there and this and that. I said, I don't know anything about that, Dev. I said,
Yeah.
that's beyond my pay grade. But Bigfoot, it was like, really, there's a Bigfoot in the desert. It's like, okay. And then as we got a computer and I could do research, I seen that there were other sightings down near 29 Palms. There had been sightings in Lancaster, which is the town 15 miles south. So there had been other sightings in that area as well.
Yeah. You know, I'm writing down these places because then I'm gonna start looking up for those encounters and things like that. So, let's see here. So, did I know about PRP? You know, um, our security clearances. You know, we had top secret security clearances, and so we had to be very careful on what we said that we saw. But did you ever tell anybody about this after it happened? Other than that airman, because I'm sure that airman knew you saw something.
I didn't tell anybody at Edwards. There's only one person I did. We had a private security company that manned the gates going into the flight line. They were called Vanguard, and typically they posted out about 20 people a shift. And there was a sergeant there that I would play chess with on occasion. And one night I took him aside and told him, I said, I know you live in Boron, which is near the rocket lab. This is what I've seen. And I told him. He said him and his son were on the lake bed to the west of, or to the east of Edwards, near the rocket lab. And they had seen a figure moving toward the hills in that area. So they drove over. They followed the tracks as far as they could till soft sand, and they couldn't make out the tracks anymore. He goes, we had never smelled a smell like that. He goes, it was just a decaying skunk smell. He goes, and we couldn't get over the fact we were being watched. And I told him, I said, I'm not making this story up. He goes, I don't think you are. He goes, I've known you now for a year. He goes, you've never made up anything like this. He's about the only one I told at Edwards. When I got to Thule, I told a couple of my buddies that I worked with. For the most part, they laughed at me.
Yeah.
And I'd tell them, I'd say, listen, I said, why do I want to tell you something that's occurred to me and have you think I'm a total idiot? I said, what do I gain by that? I said, I don't gain anything to have you think I'm a fool. I said, I'm not. I said, you don't make up a story like this to get attention. You don't.
No, you don't at all. And here's
And
oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
I said, luckily, I wasn't PRP'd like you were.
Yeah.
I had a secret clearance, but still, the government trained me and put me in areas and gave me a lot of responsibility.
Yep.
And I took it seriously. I did. I liked the fact that I could be in charge of an area like that was worth millions of dollars, and they trusted me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the big reason why I didn't tell anybody at Edwards, because I didn't want to lose that trust.
Yeah. You know, when there was a couple times like when I was applying for a job, and of course I put my military experience in there and stuff like that. And I remember one time I put in there, because I was area supervisor certified at my first base, and I was an airman first class, but I made it a point I wanted to be certified in anything and everything I possibly could be certified in, because now I'm a multi-used tool that could fit in different situations if need be. And I remember writing down on my resume that, as an airman first class at, age 19, I was responsible for billions of dollars of US assets. And I remember my interviewer one time looking at me and laughing at me. Like, yeah, really billions of dollars. And I says, all I'm going to tell you is I had a top secret clearance. That's all I'm going to tell you. Now, I never said, well, if I tell you, I got to kill you. I never said anything like that.
I
That's
didn't.
so cliche and so cheesy. But, people don't understand on what we are responsible for. I mean,
I had a guy, I went back to my 8th grade class reunion back in Missouri. And one of the guys there was a detective for the St. Louis County Police. And he knew I was an Air Force cop. And he come up to me, he goes, how many murders have you solved? I said, none. He goes, I've solved over 100. I said, well, I'm sure the citizens of St. Louis County are very grateful for your service. He goes, you've been a military cop for 12 years. You didn't solve any murders. I said, I didn't work investigations. I said, it wasn't what I did. I said, I did air base ground defense. I was on an EST team. I taught tactics. I said, I was a trainer, an armor, flight chief, desk sergeant. I said, I have guarded things worth more money than you'll ever know. I said, and I left it at that. I said, and you don't need to know what I've done, and I'm not going to tell you. I don't have to justify myself to you.
right.
I said, your job was different, just like my job was.
Mm-hmm.
I said, and you know what? I'm happy with what I did. I did a great job, and I feel good about what I did for my country. And I did.
Absolutely.
I really miss being, after I left in 92, I left because the early outs came up, and I wanted to be home when our daughters were born.
Yeah.
That year that before I left, I had gone to Fort Dix and did the air base ground defense for NCOs, came home, and 2 weeks later, I did 3 months in Panama. And I told my wife, I said, if the amount of people get out with the early outs, the missions will just go up. I said, and I don't want to be away when the kids are born.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's funny because I went through airbase ground defense in July of 91 at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Got stationed over in Germany. And then when it was time for me to leave, which I did not want to leave, I put in for all overseas bases. I didn't want to go back to the States. I wanted to see more of the world. So I was putting everything down in Asia, South America, Central America, wherever we had bases that I knew Incirlik, I wanted to go up to Iceland, I want Australia, and I got Panama, Albrook Air Base. And I was super stoked about that. I was like, man, it's going to be the greatest 2 years down there. Awesome. It's going to be fantastic. No, I'm not going to say why. I'm not going to say who did it, but my orders got amended. And I was sent to F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And that was a great assignment.
good. And I think all assignments, you got to be able to look at them and see the good. I mean, I had people laugh at me when they heard that I'd went to Thule, and I said, believe it or not, and Thule is 870 miles south of the North Pole in northwest Greenland. There's no towns, no villages. And people would just laugh, and I'd say, it was probably one of my best assignments. I said it was the people there that made it awesome.
Yep.
And I'm grateful for the experience.
I was only stationed at 2 bases. Norwich Air Base, Germany, which has since closed. I think it closed in 96. And then FE1 Air Force Base. And for me to get a munitions support squadron as my first duty assignment, I've talked to a lot of people who'd been in the Air Force 18, 20, 22 years. And they're like, you pulled that for your first assignment. You have no clue how lucky you were. Like, that was like an amazing assignment for an airman basic going there. And, I can honestly say there were rough times when in both duty assignments. I had some rough times.
Oh, challenging times, but you learn
Oh,
from them.
not only did I learn from them, but I also can honestly say this. I loved literally every single second that I was in the Air Force. Even if I had bad experiences, I still loved it because it was so challenging and I was constantly challenging myself and growing every single day. And I've heard a lot of vets say, "Well, I hated the time I was in. I was in the Navy. I hated it. I was in the Air Force. I hated it." Well, apparently you didn't. You didn't get out of it what you were. Well, no, you got out of it what you put into it.
You didn't apply yourself the right way.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I got one last question for you.
Okay.
If you could talk to another vet or a group of vets or service members who've had or seen something like this, what would you tell them?
I got to talk with several people that are in what's called the Desert Rats from Edwards. They were the security policemen that served from the mid 70s to early 80s. And I reached out to one, and that one became three, and I told them of my experience. And then they told me about what happened at the Mars facility. And I really wanted to talk to more. They had a reunion here in Ohio at the Air Force Museum at Wright Pat. And they wanted me to come down and talk. And I live in Newark, Ohio, which is only about an hour and 20 minutes away. And I told them no, I was really hesitant to do that. And I wish I had now. I do. I wish we could have met off base and we could have had dinner somewhere and we all could have shared our experiences and been able to talk about it. But I didn't feel comfortable going to the Air Force Museum and talking about it, why they were having their reunion. I just didn't.
Mhm. No, I really get it. I mean, I talk about some of the stuff that I'd seen in Norvenich. I have a buddy that I talk to quite often. He lives in Syracuse, New York, and we lived in the same dormitory. We we partied in the same part of the dormitory, and we saw a lot of the same stuff. Like, and we talk about it, we laugh about it, but when it happens at its time, it's pretty freaky.
It
And
is.
we lived in a, dormitory, dorm 4E, so 4 Echo, and it was lovingly known as the morgue.
Ooh.
Yeah, yeah, and the name fits the activity that went on in that dormitory. So, but do you have any questions for me?
No, I just appreciate the fact that you were able to listen to me and invited me to come on. Thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure, and you were like the first person to reach out to me, and so I was like, "Yes, I got one." I just did. Um, I spoke with a guy from Kirkland, and there's a few more people that have some stuff going on, but they'll be free more towards the end of the month or the beginning of next month. So hopefully I'll be able to connect with them. But I'm
Thank you,
always looking
Daniel.
for interviews. I appreciate it, man. And you know what, Dick? Thank you so much for your service, man. I appreciate you.
Same with you, Daniel. Thank you for
You're
all you do for our country.
you were one of the trailblazers for young guys. Well, at the time, young guys like me, because as I was coming in, you were leaving. You know, so thank you
And
for.
I did not want to leave. I mean, my wife had a hell of a time with me just going back and forth because I'd put in orders for us to go to Alaska and this came up and she was terrified with the thought of driving all the way from Newark, Ohio to Alaska.
Yeah.
And I said, it's a big adventure, dear. It gives you a chance to see things you've never seen, meet people that you've never met. I said, it's how you have to look at it.
Yeah. I made a
So,
promise to myself that as long as I was active duty, I would never have a serious girlfriend, uh, or I would never get married, and I didn't want to have kids. And if that was the case, if my plan would have worked out the way I wanted it to, I'd probably be single and not have any kids. But things happened the way they happened, and I have a beautiful wife. I have 3 beautiful kids. I got 3 beautiful grandkids,
congratulations.
and I owe it all to the military. So
Same here.
All right.
I'm just very grateful.
If you want to stay in the lobby for a couple moments, we'll do a little bit of chatting. All right.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you all for listening tonight.
Thanks a lot, bud. Stand
All
by.
right. I will.
You guys, that was our guest, Dick. I'm telling you right now, I love listening to stories from fellow veterans and other bases because I know what my experiences were at the 2 bases I was stationed at, but I know and I've heard so many more stories out there that, I want to hear them. Whether they're ghost stories or cryptid stories or funny stories, I want to listen to them. So if anybody out there listen, when you listen to this episode, if you are prior military and you have some encounters, please shoot me an email at the cryptidpodcast72@gmail.com. And you guys, if you've had an encounter and you weren't in the military and you'd like to share it on the show, please, again, send me an email at the cryptidpodcast72@gmail.com. You guys, with that being said, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me tonight and watching this episode. Like my buddy Josh from Mysteries Unknown always says, he says, stay prayed up. And as I always like to say, remember, a legend begins with a sighting. You guys have a fantastic night, and I'll see you again soon.
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?